The sound of hammer against nail echoed across the empty prairie. Each strike a promise Xavier Zimmerman made to himself and to the woman he had yet to meet. He had been building for 3 months now, his hands blistered and bleeding, his back aching from dawn until dusk, constructing a home from nothing but raw timber and determination in the wild Arkansas territory of 1878. The house stood halfway finished on a gentle rise overlooking a creek that ran clear and cold, surrounded by oak trees that would provide shade in summer and shelter from winter winds. Every board he placed, every window frame he fitted, every stone he laid for the foundation carried with it the weight of his dreams. Xavier was 26 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered from years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. His hands were calloused, his face sun-darkened, and his dark hair fell past his collar because he rarely found time to visit a barber. He had saved every dollar he could from 5 years of cowboy work, sleeping under stars and eating beans from a tin plate, all so he could claim this land and build something permanent, something that would last, something that would shelter a family. The land itself had cost him 2 years of wages, 160 acres purchased from the government land office in Fort Smith. The timber came from his own property, trees he had felled himself and hauled to a mill 30 miles away, then brought back as planks and beams. He had no help because he could afford none, and pride would not let him ask for charity. Every morning he woke in his tent beside the construction site, ate a cold breakfast, and worked until darkness made it impossible to see. Every night he fell asleep with splinters in his fingers and sawdust in his hair, dreaming of the day he would bring a wife to this place. The house was taking shape now. 2 stories, with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs. A wide front porch where they could sit in the evenings. A kitchen with a proper stove, once he could afford to buy one. Glass windows he had ordered from a catalog, spending money that made his stomach twist with worry but knowing a home needed light. The roof was nearly complete, shingled with cedar he had split himself. The walls were solid, the doors hung straight, and the floors were sanded smooth. Xavier stood back on a hot afternoon in early September, wiping sweat from his forehead and surveying his work. The house was not fancy, not like the grand homes he had seen in Kansas City or St. Louis during cattle drives. But it was honest and strong, built to withstand the fierce storms that rolled across the Arkansas frontier. He had poured everything he had into these walls, and now they stood ready. Ready for what, exactly, he was not entirely sure. He had no sweetheart waiting, no arranged marriage, no woman who had promised to share this life with him. What he had was hope, and a plan that seemed both perfectly logical and completely insane depending on when he thought about it. He would ride into Fort Smith, the rough border town 40 miles southeast, and he would find a wife. Somehow. The idea had come to him during the long, solitary months of construction. Fort Smith sat on the edge of Indian Territory, a place where law was thin and danger was thick, where federal marshals tracked outlaws through the wilderness and justice often came at the end of a rope. It was also a place where people came when they had nowhere else to go, including women who might be looking for a fresh start, a new chance, a man who could offer them something better than what they were running from. Xavier had no illusions about being a catch. He was rough around the edges, quiet to the point of seeming unfriendly, and his bank account held exactly $17 after buying the windows. But he had land, he had a house, and he had a willingness to work until his hands bled to provide for a family. That had to count for something. He spent another week finishing the interior work. He built a bed frame for the master bedroom, sturdy and wide from oak. He constructed shelves in the kitchen and a table with 4 chairs for the dining area. He dug a proper well and installed a pump in the kitchen, so water would not have to be hauled from the creek. He built a barn for horses and a chicken coop, both empty but ready. He cleared a plot for a garden and fenced it against deer and rabbits. When everything was as ready as he could make it, Xavier packed his saddlebags with his spare clothes, his $17, and enough food for the 3-day journey to Fort Smith. His horse, a dependable bay gelding named Chester, seemed to sense the importance of the trip and pranced with unusual energy as Xavier saddled him in the pre-dawn darkness. The ride to Fort Smith took him through territory that was slowly being settled but still felt wild and empty. He passed a few homesteads where families were scratching out lives from the red clay soil, their houses small and crude compared to what he had built. He crossed creeks swollen from recent rains and climbed hills covered in oak and hickory forests. At night he camped alone, building small fires and listening to coyotes sing in the distance. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Fort Smith appeared on the horizon. The town sprawled along the Arkansas River, a chaotic collection of wooden buildings, tents, and muddy streets. The federal courthouse dominated the center of town, a symbol of the law that Judge Isaac Parker dispensed with legendary severity. They called him the hanging judge, and the gallows near the courthouse had seen more than its share of use. Xavier rode down Garrison Avenue, the main street, passing saloons and gambling halls, general stores and hotels, a bank and a land office, a newspaper office, and several churches. The boardwalks were crowded with people from every walk of life: marshals with tin stars pinned to their vests, cowboys fresh off cattle drives, merchants in suit coats, Cherokee and Choctaw from the territory, women in calico dresses and bonnets, gamblers in fancy waistcoats, and rough characters who looked like they were one step ahead of the law or one step behind. He found a livery stable where he could board Chester for a week, paying $2 that made his remaining funds feel dangerously small. The stable owner, an old man with a tobacco-stained beard, asked what brought him to town. "Looking for work," the old man asked. "Looking for a wife," Xavier said, and the old man laughed so hard he started coughing. "Well, you have come to the right place, son. Fort Smith has got plenty of women looking for husbands. Some are decent, some are not. I recommend you start at the boarding houses and stay out of the saloons if you want the marrying kind." Xavier nodded his thanks and walked deeper into town, carrying his saddlebags over his shoulder. He found a cheap hotel near the edge of the commercial district and paid for 3 nights, leaving him with $12. The room was small and the bed was lumpy, but it was better than sleeping on the ground. He cleaned up as best he could with the wash basin and pitcher provided, shaving carefully and putting on his one good shirt. It was blue cotton, faded from many washings but still presentable. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror above the dresser and saw a man who looked uncertain and out of place in town. But he squared his shoulders and headed out. Finding a wife, he quickly discovered, was more complicated than he had imagined. He stopped at a church and spoke with the pastor, a kind-faced man named Reverend Matthews who listened to his story with interest. "So you have built a house, and now you need a wife to fill it," Reverend Matthews said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "That is doing things somewhat backward, but I suppose it shows determination. I know several young ladies in the congregation who might be interested in meeting you. There is Clara Henderson, whose father owns the dry goods store, very respectable family. And Sarah Morrison, who teaches at the schoolhouse. Both are of good character and looking to settle down." Xavier met Clara Henderson that evening after church services. She was 19, pretty in a conventional way, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and a manner that suggested she had never known hardship. They sat in her father's parlor with her mother present as chaperone, and Xavier tried to explain what he was offering. "I have 160 acres about 40 miles northwest of here," he said, his voice sounding too rough in the refined surroundings. "The house is new, built solid. 2 stories, 4 rooms down and 2 up. There is a well, a barn, good water from a creek. The land is fertile, and I plan to run cattle and plant crops." Clara smiled politely, but her eyes showed doubt. "That sounds very remote. Are there neighbors?" "Not close. The nearest homestead is about 5 miles away. And what would I do all day while you are working?" "There is plenty of work on a homestead. Cooking, cleaning, tending a garden, chickens, eventually children." Clara glanced at her mother, and Xavier saw his answer in that look. This girl was not interested in the hard, isolated life of a frontier homestead. She wanted to stay in Fort Smith, near her family and the comforts of town. The conversation limped along for another half-hour before Xavier made his excuses and left. Sarah Morrison proved equally unsuitable when he met her the next day. She was older, 24, serious and intelligent, but she made it clear within the first 10 minutes that she had no intention of giving up her teaching position to become a rancher's wife. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Zimmerman," she said as they sat on a bench outside the schoolhouse. "But I have worked very hard to establish myself as a teacher. I am not interested in trading that for a life of isolation and manual labor." Xavier could not fault her for knowing what she wanted. He tipped his hat and walked away, feeling discouraged. He had 2 more nights paid at the hotel, and $10 left to his name. The idea of riding back to his empty house alone was beginning to seem less like a temporary situation and more like a permanent state. That evening, feeling defeated, he walked into a restaurant on Garrison Avenue called the Frontier Kitchen. It was a modest establishment, clean but simple, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fried chicken and fresh bread. A middle-aged woman with a warm smile seated him at a table near the window and handed him a handwritten menu. "The special tonight is chicken and dumplings," she said. "Best in Fort Smith, if I do say so myself. I am Molly Raid. I own the place." "Xavier Zimmerman, madam." "The chicken and dumplings sound fine." As he waited for his food, Xavier watched the activity on the street outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple, and people were heading home or heading out for the evening. It was then that he noticed the young woman working behind the counter near the kitchen. She was tall, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her face was striking rather than pretty, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore a plain brown dress with a white apron, and she moved with efficiency as she refilled coffee cups and cleared tables. There was something about the way she carried herself, a kind of quiet strength mixed with wariness, that caught Xavier's attention and held it. Molly Reed returned with his dinner, and Xavier found himself asking, "Who is that woman working the counter?" Molly followed his gaze and smiled. "That is Olivia Norton. She has been working for me about 3 months now. Sweet girl, hard worker, keeps to herself mostly." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Xavier said, but he could not stop glancing in that direction as he ate. The chicken and dumplings were as good as promised, and Xavier took his time with the meal, partly because it was delicious and partly because it gave him a reason to stay and observe Olivia Norton. She handled every task with quiet competence, never rushing but never wasting motion either. When a drunk cowboy came in and made crude comments, she dealt with him firmly but without creating a scene, steering him to a table in the corner and bringing him coffee instead of the whiskey he demanded. When Xavier finished eating, he paid his bill and left a generous tip, which was foolish considering his financial situation but felt right somehow. As he walked back to his hotel, he could not get the image of Olivia Norton out of his mind. There was something about her that spoke to him, though he could not have explained what or why. The next morning, he returned to the frontier kitchen for breakfast. Olivia was there again, working the morning shift. Xavier ordered eggs and bacon and coffee, and when she brought his food, he looked up and met her eyes. "Thank you, miss," he said. "You are welcome," she replied, her voice low and pleasant. For a moment their eyes held, and Xavier saw intelligence there, and caution, and something else he could not quite name. That afternoon, Xavier did something that surprised himself. He went to Molly Reed and asked if he could speak with her privately. They sat at a table in the empty restaurant between lunch and dinner service, and Xavier told her the truth. "I have built a house on land I own northwest of here," he began. "I came to Fort Smith looking for a wife. I have met a couple of women, but they were not interested in the kind of life I am offering. Last night I saw Miss Norton working here, and I would like to know if she might be interested in meeting me properly, with the understanding that I am looking for a wife." Molly studied him for a long moment, her expression serious. "You are direct, I will give you that. Most men would dance around it for weeks. What makes you think Olivia would be interested?" "I do not know if she would be. That is why I am asking you first. I do not want to cause any trouble or make her uncomfortable. Can you tell me what you are offering? What kind of man are you?" Xavier took a deep breath and told her everything. About the 5 years working cattle drives, the land he had purchased, the 3 months building the house with his own hands, about the 160 acres and the plans he had for the future, about his limited funds and his unlimited willingness to work, about the isolated location and the hard life it would entail, but also about the freedom and the possibility of building something that would last. When he finished, Molly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I will tell you something about Olivia, and then I will ask her if she wants to meet you. She came to Fort Smith 3 months ago from somewhere back east. I do not know the full story, but I know she was running from something or someone. She had no money, no family here, and no prospects. I gave her a job and a room upstairs because I liked her spirit and because every woman deserves a chance. She has been a blessing to me, honest and hard-working and never a moment of trouble. But I can see she is lonely, and I can see she is afraid of being found by whatever she left behind. Your offer might be exactly what she needs, or it might be too much too soon. I will present it to her honestly, and she will decide." "That is all I ask," Xavier said. That evening, as Xavier sat in the hotel room wondering if he had made a fool of himself, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Molly Reed standing there. "Olivia has agreed to meet you," Molly said. "Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon in the restaurant. I will be present as chaperone, but I will give you enough privacy to talk honestly." Xavier barely slept that night. He rehearsed what he would say 100 times, then decided rehearsing was foolish and he should just speak from the heart. He washed his shirt again and polished his boots and wished he had better clothes, more money, something to offer beyond raw land and rough hands, and a lonely house waiting on the prairie. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, Xavier walked into the frontier kitchen to find Olivia Norton sitting at a table near the back. She had changed from her work dress into something nicer, a green cotton dress that brought out her eyes. Her hair was still pulled back, but a few curls had escaped to frame her face. She looked nervous, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Xavier sat down across from her, suddenly aware of how big and awkward he felt in the civilized setting. Molly brought them coffee and then retreated to the counter, far enough away to give them privacy but close enough to preserve propriety. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Miss Norton," Xavier began. "Please call me Olivia. And you are Xavier?" "Yes, Xavier Zimmerman. Mrs. Reed told me about your proposal. It is unusual. I know it is. I apologize if I have been too forward. I do not have much time or money to do this the traditional way with long courtships and proper introductions. But I wanted to be honest about what I am looking for and what I have to offer." Olivia studied him with those intelligent green eyes. "Tell me about your house." So Xavier told her. He described every detail of the construction, the placement on the land, the view of the creek, the oak trees, the 2 stories and the wide porch. He told her about the well and the barn and the chicken coop waiting to be filled. He told her about his plans for cattle and crops, about how he had saved for years to make this dream possible. He told her about the isolation and the hard work and the challenges they would face. "It will not be easy," he said honestly. "The nearest town is a full day's ride. Winter can be harsh. There will be times when we are snowed in for days or weeks. You would have to be strong and resourceful. But you would also be building something from the ground up, something that would be ours. And I promise I would work every day to make it a good life." When he finished, Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you my story, please?" She took a breath, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "I came from Ohio. My father died when I was 16 and my mother passed 2 years later. I had no siblings, no family except a cousin who took me in. His name was Harold and at first he seemed kind, but he wanted more than a cousin's affection. When I refused him, he became angry. He told everyone in town that I was ruined, that I had given myself to him and then rejected him. No one would believe my side of the story. I lost my reputation, my friends, any chance of a normal life there, so I left. I traveled west with what little money I had, and I ended up here. I have been working for Mrs. Reed and trying to build a new life. But I am always afraid that Harold will find me, that the past will catch up with me. I am 22 years old, and I feel like my life is already over before it began." Xavier felt anger rise in his chest at the injustice of her story, but he kept his voice calm. "Your life is not over. And if you came with me, you would be far enough from Ohio that the past could not reach you. As my wife, you would have my name and my protection. No one would question your reputation or your character. You would marry me even knowing I have been slandered. Even knowing that Harold told lies about me. I do not care what some coward in Ohio said about you. I care about the woman sitting in front of me right now. And everything I see tells me you are strong, honest, and brave. Those are the qualities I want in a wife." Tears gathered in Olivia's eyes but did not fall. "Why me? You could find someone without a past, without complications." "Maybe, but I saw you working yesterday, and I saw someone who does not give up, who does what needs to be done without complaint. I saw someone who handles trouble with grace and strength. That is what I need in a partner. Not someone who has had an easy life, but someone who knows how to survive and keep going when things get hard." Olivia was quiet again, and Xavier waited, his heart pounding. Finally, she said, "What would you expect from me? Honestly, I would expect a partnership. I would work the land and you would manage the house. We would make decisions together. I would expect faithfulness and honesty, and I would give you the same. I would expect you to work hard because the life demands it, but I would never ask you to do more than you are capable of. And I would expect that over time, we would build not just a home but a family if God wills it. And if I said yes, when would we leave? As soon as possible. I have paid for the hotel through tomorrow night. If we married tomorrow, we could leave the day after." "That is very fast. I know, but I am being honest about my situation. I have about $8 left to my name. Every day I stay in town is another day I am not working the land and building our future. I cannot afford a long engagement." Olivia looked at him for a long time, and Xavier saw her weighing everything in her mind. The risk, the opportunity, the escape from her past, the uncertainty of the future. Finally, she said, "I need to think about this. Can you give me until tomorrow morning?" "Of course." They sat for a few more minutes, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Xavier told her about Chester, his horse, and she told him she had always wanted to learn to ride. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, and she told him about her childhood in Ohio before her parents died. By the time they parted, there was a tentative warmth between them, a sense that they might actually like each other beyond the practical arrangement they were discussing. That night, Xavier prayed harder than he had in years, not for Olivia to say yes, but for her to make the right decision for herself, whatever that might be, and for the strength to accept her answer either way. The next morning, Xavier was eating breakfast at the frontier kitchen when Olivia appeared. She was not scheduled to work, and she was wearing a traveling dress, brown wool with a matching jacket. She carried a small carpet bag. Her face was pale but determined. She sat down across from Xavier and said, "My answer is yes. If you will have me, I will marry you and go with you to your house." Xavier felt relief and joy wash over him so strongly that for a moment he could not speak. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, the first time they had touched. Her hand was slender but strong, her palm calloused from work. "Thank you," he said simply. "I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy and keep you safe." "I believe you," Olivia said, and her smile was the first truly unguarded expression he had seen from her. They were married that afternoon by Reverend Matthews in the small church, with Molly Reid and a few of her friends as witnesses. Xavier used 3 of his remaining dollars to buy a simple gold band from a jeweler on Garrison Avenue. It was thin and plain, but when he slipped it on Olivia's finger, it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. The ceremony was brief. Xavier wore his blue shirt and his best pants. Olivia wore her brown traveling dress. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Olivia gently, and she kissed him back with surprising warmth. They spent their wedding night in Xavier's hotel room, which felt inadequate and awkward, but Olivia seemed to understand that this was temporary. They lay in the narrow bed, fully clothed at first, talking quietly in the darkness. "Are you afraid?" Xavier asked. "Terrified," Olivia admitted. "But also relieved and hopeful. Is that strange?" "No, I feel the same way. Tell me more about the house. I want to picture it in my mind." So Xavier described it again, in more detail this time. The way the morning sun would stream through the east-facing windows in the kitchen. The view from the upstairs bedroom of the creek and the hills beyond. The sound of the wind in the oak trees. The way the porch would be perfect for sitting in the evenings and watching the sunset. As he talked, Olivia moved closer to him, and he wrapped his arm around her. She rested her head on his chest, and they fell asleep that way, new husband and wife, holding each other against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The next morning, they prepared to leave Fort Smith. Xavier bought supplies with his last few dollars, flour and sugar and coffee and other necessities that Olivia helped him select. Molly Reid gave them a wedding gift of a set of cooking pots and a beautiful quilt she had made herself. She hugged Olivia fiercely and whispered something in her ear that Xavier could not hear, but that made Olivia smile through tears. "You take care of her," Molly told Xavier. "She is special, that one." "I know," I will. They rode out of Fort Smith at mid-morning, Xavier on Chester and Olivia on a gentle mare named Daisy that Xavier had purchased from the livery, using the last of his money plus a promise to pay the rest in 6 months when he sold his first cattle. The stable owner, remembering Xavier's mission, agreed with a knowing grin. Olivia had never spent much time on horseback, but she learned quickly, sitting straight and holding the reins with confidence. Xavier kept a slower pace than he had used on the journey to town, conscious of her inexperience and the fact that they had all their possessions packed on the horses. The first day of travel was beautiful, the September weather warm but not oppressively hot, the sky clear and blue. They rode through the oak and hickory forests, following rough trails that Xavier knew from his previous journey. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and stretch their legs. At noon, they ate bread and cheese beside a creek, sitting on a fallen log and watching the water flow past. "This is beautiful country," Olivia said. "I had no idea it would be like this. In Ohio, everything was so settled, so tame." "Wait until you see the open prairie," Xavier said. "It stretches as far as you can see in every direction. Some people find it lonely, but I think it is magnificent." They talked as they rode, learning about each other in the easy way that comes when people have committed to a shared future and want to understand the person they have chosen. Xavier told her about his years on cattle drives, the rivers he had crossed and the storms he had weathered, the buffalo herds he had seen and the cowboys he had known. Olivia told him about her childhood, the books she had loved and the dreams she had cherished, the pain of losing her parents and the betrayal of her cousin. "I will never let anyone hurt you like that again," Xavier promised. "You are under my protection now." "I do not want to be helpless," Olivia said. "I want to learn how to protect myself too. Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to shoot, how to ride better, how to survive out here." Xavier smiled. "I will teach you everything I know." They camped that night under the stars, Xavier building a fire and Olivia unpacking their supplies and cooking their first meal together. It was simple fare, bacon and beans and coffee, but it tasted wonderful in the open air. After they ate, they sat close to the fire and Xavier pointed out constellations in the sky. Olivia listened intently, asking questions, her face illuminated by firelight. When it was time to sleep, Xavier spread out their bedrolls side by side. They lay down together, and this time Olivia turned to him with less hesitation. They kissed, and the kiss deepened, and what followed was tender and careful, both of them aware that this was new territory for them as a couple. Afterward, Olivia cried a little, but when Xavier asked if he had hurt her, she shook her head. "I am just relieved," she whispered. "I was so afraid that the lies Harold told would be true in some way, that I would be ruined for this. But I am not. I am yours, really yours, and it feels right." Xavier held her close, feeling a fierce protectiveness and a deep gratitude that this woman had trusted him enough to take this leap of faith. The second day of travel brought them out of the forests and into more open country. The landscape rolled in gentle hills covered with tall grass that rippled in the wind like waves on the ocean. Wildflowers bloomed in patches of purple and yellow. Hawks circled overhead, hunting for field mice and rabbits. Olivia was sore from riding but did not complain. Xavier noticed her discomfort and suggested they walk the horses for a while, leading them on foot. She accepted gratefully, and they walked side by side, talking about their plans for the homestead. "I want to plant a big garden," Olivia said. "Vegetables, of course, but also flowers." "I know flowers are impractical, but I think a home should have beauty as well as function." "Then you will have flowers," Xavier said. "There is a spot on the south side of the house that gets good sun. It would be perfect for a flower garden." And I want chickens, a whole flock of them. Fresh eggs every morning. The chicken coop is already built, just waiting to be filled. You really did think of everything, did you not? I tried, though I am sure there are things I missed, things a woman would know better than a man. We will figure it out together, Olivia said, and Xavier loved the confidence in her voice, the way she was already thinking of them as a team. That night, they camped beside a small stream and Xavier caught 2 fish for their dinner. Olivia watched him clean them with interest, and when he offered to teach her, she accepted without hesitation. By the time they were cooking the fish over the fire, her hands were covered in fish scales, and she was laughing at the mess she had made of the process. But she was determined to learn. "I am not going to be a delicate wife who faints at the sight of blood," she declared. "If I am going to live on a frontier homestead, I need to know how to do everything." "You are going to be a remarkable woman," Xavier said, and meant it. On the 3rd day, they finally reached Xavier's land. As they crested the final hill and the house came into view, Xavier felt his heart swell with pride and nervousness. Would Olivia like it? Would it meet her expectations? It looked smaller than he remembered, just a simple wooden structure in the middle of vast emptiness. But Olivia's reaction erased all his doubts. She stopped her horse and stared at the house, at the creek beyond it, at the oak trees and the barn and the chicken coop, and her face lit up with genuine joy. "Xavier, it is perfect," she breathed. "You built all of this yourself, every board, every nail. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." They rode down the hill together, and Xavier helped Olivia dismount in front of the house. He tied the horses to the porch rail and then turned to her with sudden formality. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, "may I carry you across the threshold of our home?" Olivia laughed, surprised and delighted. "I would be honored, Mr. Zimmerman." Xavier picked her up easily, cradling her in his arms, and carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood together in the empty house that would become their home. Olivia walked through each room slowly, running her hands over the walls Xavier had built, the window frames he had fitted, the floors he had sanded. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and explored both bedrooms, then came back down to the kitchen. She tested the pump and exclaimed with delight when water flowed clear and cold. "This is wonderful. I will not have to haul water from the creek, not for cooking and washing." "Though you might still want to visit the creek. It is a beautiful spot." Olivia came to him then and wrapped her arms around his waist, looking up at him with shining eyes. "Thank you for building this for us. Thank you for coming to Fort Smith and finding me. Thank you for giving me a new life." Xavier kissed her, a long, deep kiss that conveyed everything he felt but could not put into words. When they finally broke apart, he said, "We should unpack and get settled before dark." They spent the rest of the afternoon making the house into a home. Xavier carried in their supplies while Olivia organized the kitchen, putting the pots and dishes on shelves, storing the food in the pantry. They unrolled Molly's quilt on the bed upstairs, and Olivia made it up with the sheets they had purchased in Fort Smith. Xavier brought in firewood and got the stove working, and soon the house was warm and filled with the smell of cooking food. That evening, they ate dinner at the table Xavier had built, sitting across from each other in the lamplight. It was a simple meal, but it felt significant, their first dinner in their own home as husband and wife. After they ate, they sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. The air was cool, and Xavier draped his jacket around Olivia's shoulders. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. "Does it feel like home?" "It is starting to," Olivia said. "I think it will take time, but yes, I can feel it. This is our home." The days that followed established a rhythm that would define their life together. Xavier rose before dawn and worked on the land, fencing pastures and clearing fields for planting. Olivia managed the house with impressive efficiency, cooking and cleaning and learning the dozens of skills required for frontier life. Xavier taught her to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn and patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a tin can at 20 paces. Olivia taught herself to bake bread, experimenting with the wood stove until she mastered the temperamental heat. Within a week, Xavier rode to the nearest homestead, 5 miles to the south, and introduced himself to the family there. They were a German couple named Heinrich and Greta Schuller with 3 young children. They welcomed Xavier warmly and were delighted to learn he had brought a wife. Greta, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, insisted on visiting Olivia the next day, riding over with one of her daughters and bringing fresh eggs and a loaf of dark rye bread as gifts. Olivia was nervous about the visit, afraid that somehow her past would have followed her even here, but Greta was warm and non-judgmental. The 2 women sat at Olivia's kitchen table drinking coffee, and Greta shared valuable advice about surviving the Arkansas winters and managing a homestead. By the time she left, Olivia had a friend and an ally. Xavier used his carpentry skills to barter for supplies. He built a bookshelf for the Schullers in exchange for a pregnant sow. He repaired a wagon wheel for a homesteader 10 miles away and received 2 laying hens and a rooster in return. Slowly, their empty barn and chicken coop began to fill. In October, Xavier rode to a town 30 miles east and hired on with a crew gathering cattle from the open range. He worked for 3 weeks, sleeping rough and eating trail food, but he came home with $40 in his pocket. It was enough to buy seed for spring planting and to make the payment he owed the livery owner in Fort Smith. He rode back to town, made the payment, and returned to find that Olivia had planted a small fall garden and the chickens were already laying eggs. The first time Olivia collected eggs from the chicken coop, she carried the basket into the house with such excitement that Xavier could not help but laugh at her joy. She was discovering pleasures she had never known in her town life, the satisfaction of producing food with her own hands, the simple happiness of watching things grow. In November, the weather turned cold and the first snow fell. Xavier had prepared well, stocking firewood and supplies, and the house stayed warm and comfortable. They spent long evenings by the fire, Olivia reading aloud from the few books they owned while Xavier carved or repaired tools. Sometimes they just talked, sharing their thoughts and dreams, learning to communicate not just with words but with silences and glances and touches. One evening, as they sat together on the sofa Xavier had built, Olivia said, "I have been thinking about children. Do you want them?" "Very much," Xavier said, "but only when you are ready. There is no rush." "I think I am ready. I think I want to fill this house with life and noise and chaos. I want to give children the kind of stable, loving home I lost when my parents died." Xavier pulled her close, his hand resting on her hair. "Then we will have children and we will love them and raise them to be strong and good." "How many do you want?" "As many as God gives us. 4, 5, 6. I grew up alone and it was lonely. I want our children to have brothers and sisters." "I want that too," Olivia said softly. By December, they had settled into a comfortable partnership that felt less like a new marriage and more like they had been together for years. They worked side by side, complementing each other's strengths. Xavier was the planner, always thinking ahead to what needed to be done next season. Olivia was the problem solver, finding creative solutions to unexpected challenges. When a pipe froze in the kitchen, she wrapped it in rags and poured hot water over it until it thawed. When a winter storm damaged part of the barn roof, Xavier repaired it despite the bitter cold, and Olivia kept hot coffee and warm food ready for when he came back inside. Christmas came, and they celebrated alone but happily. Olivia baked cookies and roasted a chicken. Xavier carved her a beautiful jewelry box from walnut wood with her initials inlaid in maple. Olivia gave him a new shirt she had sewn herself, the stitches small and perfect. They hung spruce branches around the house and sang carols by the fire, and Olivia cried a little because she was so happy and because she had been so afraid, just 4 months earlier, that she would never have this kind of life. The new year of 1879 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. They were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks in January, unable to reach the barn except by following a rope Xavier had strung from the house. But inside, they were warm and well-fed and content. They played cards and told stories and made love in their big oak bed while snow piled up outside the windows. When the snow finally melted and spring began to arrive, Xavier prepared the fields for planting. He borrowed a plow from Heinrich Schuller and spent long days turning the rich soil. Olivia planted her garden, vegetables and flowers both, and tended it carefully as seedlings emerged. The chickens became more productive, and the sow gave birth to 8 healthy piglets that squealed and rooted around the barnyard. In April, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell Xavier until she was certain, and when she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, his reaction was everything she had hoped. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you well? Do you feel ill? Should you be resting?" Olivia laughed. "I am fine. Pregnant women are not invalids, but yes, I am very well and very happy." Xavier knelt in front of her and placed his hands gently on her stomach. "Hello, little one, your father is very excited to meet you." Over the following months, Xavier watched Olivia's body change with wonder and protectiveness. He took over the heavier chores without being asked, insisting she rest more even though she protested that she felt fine. He built a cradle from pine wood and placed it in their bedroom. Greta Schuller visited often, bringing advice and baby clothes her own children had outgrown. In late November, as winter approached again, Olivia went into labor. Xavier rode through the cold darkness to fetch Greta, who arrived with her medical kit and calm competence. For 12 hours, Xavier paced downstairs while Olivia labored upstairs with Greta attending her. He heard her cries of pain and felt utterly helpless, praying desperately that both she and the baby would survive. Finally, as dawn broke on a cold November morning, he heard a different sound. The thin, angry cry of a newborn baby. Xavier ran up the stairs and burst into the bedroom to find Greta holding a tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in a blanket. "You have a son," Greta said, smiling. "A strong, healthy son." Xavier looked at Olivia, who was pale and exhausted but smiling. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand, kissing it gently. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Greta placed the baby in Xavier's arms, and he looked down at his son with overwhelming love and fear and joy. The baby had dark hair like his own and was so small and fragile that Xavier was afraid he might break him just by holding him wrong. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked. They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. But now, looking at his son, Xavier said, "Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Zimmerman." "Thomas," Olivia repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Little Thomas Zimmerman changed their lives in ways both wonderful and exhausting. He was a healthy baby with powerful lungs and a strong will. Olivia nursed him and cared for him with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning motherhood through trial and error. Xavier found himself waking in the night to the sound of crying, going to help Olivia change diapers or just to hold his son while she rested. The winter of 1879 to 1880 was harder than the previous one, with Thomas to care for and less sleep for everyone. But it was also filled with moments of perfect happiness. The first time Thomas smiled at Xavier, a real smile and not just gas, Xavier felt his heart expand with a love he had not known was possible. The first time Thomas laughed, a gurgling baby laugh at something Olivia did, they both laughed with him until they were crying with joy. Spring came again, and with it the endless work of planting and building and expanding. Xavier added a room to the house, a proper nursery for Thomas. He fenced another 10 acres for cattle and purchased 6 young steers with money he earned freighting supplies for the nearby town. Olivia's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she canned for winter and flowers that she picked to brighten the house. By the summer of 1880, the homestead was thriving. The fields produced good crops of corn and wheat. The pigs multiplied. The chickens provided more eggs than they could eat, so Olivia started selling the extras to neighbors. Xavier's reputation as a skilled carpenter spread, and he was hired for projects throughout the area, bringing in additional income. On their second wedding anniversary in September, Xavier and Olivia sat on their porch as the sun set, watching Thomas toddle around the yard chasing a chicken. He was 9 months old, walking early and already showing signs of his father's determination and his mother's intelligence. "Do you remember 2 years ago when we met in Fort Smith?" Xavier asked. "Every detail," Olivia said. "I was so frightened and so desperate, I felt like my life was over. And now I feel like my life has finally begun. I look at Thomas and at this home we have built and at you, and I cannot believe how lucky I am." "How did you know, Xavier? How did you know we would be right for each other?" Xavier thought about that. "I did not know. I hoped. I saw strength in you and courage, and I hoped that if I could offer you safety and partnership, we might build something good together. But I had no guarantees. We both took a leap of faith." "Best decision I ever made," Olivia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Mine too." The years passed, each one building on the last. In 1881, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, called Maggie from the day she was born. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes and a sweet temperament that made everyone who met her fall in love with her. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping care for her, bringing her his toys and patting her head gently. In 1882, Xavier finally had enough money to buy breeding cattle, purchasing 10 cows and a bull from a rancher in Texas. He hired a hand to help with the increased work, a young man named Billy who built himself a small cabin on the far end of the property and proved to be a hard worker and good company. In 1883, their third child was born, another son they named James. He was the biggest of their babies and the most demanding, keeping Olivia exhausted for the first 6 months. But he was also joyful and affectionate, quick to smile and slow to cry once the infant stage passed. The homestead expanded to include 240 acres when Xavier was able to purchase adjoining land. They built a larger barn and a smokehouse and a root cellar. The original house was expanded again with an addition that included a proper dining room and a larger kitchen. Olivia's flower garden became famous in the area, and neighbors would ride over just to see the roses and hollyhocks and daisies blooming in brilliant profusion. In 1884, a 4th child arrived, a daughter they named Catherine. By now, Olivia and Xavier had the rhythm of parenting down, and Catherine's arrival felt less overwhelming and more like a natural addition to their growing family. Thomas was 6 now, helping his father with chores. Maggie was 3, following her mother everywhere and learning to help with cooking and cleaning. James was 1, toddling around and getting into everything. The house was noisy and chaotic and full of life, exactly what both Xavier and Olivia had dreamed of. Some evenings, after the children were finally asleep, they would sit together in the kitchen, exhausted but content, and marvel at what they had built. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come to Fort Smith?" Olivia asked one such evening. "All the time," Xavier admitted. "I think about how lonely my life would have been, how empty this house would have felt. I would have had land and cattle and a roof over my head, but I would not have had a home. You and the children, you are what makes this a home." "I think about Ohio sometimes," Olivia said quietly. "About Harold and the lies he told. Part of me still feels angry about what he took from me. But then I realize that if that had not happened, I never would have left. I never would have been in Fort Smith. I never would have met you. In a strange way, the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing." Xavier reached across the table and took her hand. "I am glad you found your way here, glad you trusted me enough to take a chance." "I would make the same choice every time," Olivia said. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed." In 1885, the community around them had grown enough that a school was established, a one-room building halfway between the Zimmerman homestead and town. Olivia volunteered to teach, remembering Sarah Morrison back in Fort Smith and the career she had been unwilling to give up. But Olivia found she could have both, teaching 3 days a week while Xavier managed the children on those days and spending the rest of her time at home. Thomas started school that year, proving to be a bright student who loved learning. Maggie could not wait until she was old enough to join him. Xavier continued to expand the ranch, and in the summer of 1885, he hired 2 more hands and drove his first herd of cattle to market in Kansas City. The sale brought in enough money that Xavier opened an account at the bank in the nearest town, finally having savings beyond just the value of land and livestock. In 1886, their 5th child was born, another son they named Daniel. He was smaller than the others had been, and Olivia's labor was harder, leaving her weak for weeks afterward. Greta Schuller moved into the house to help, and Xavier hired a woman from town to assist with the children and housework until Olivia recovered. It was the only time in their marriage that Xavier truly feared losing her, and when she finally regained her strength, he held her and cried with relief. "No more," he said. "We have 5 beautiful children. That is enough. I will not risk you again." But Olivia, stronger and more stubborn than ever, disagreed. "I am fine. Daniel is fine. We are blessed, Xavier. If God gives us more children, we will welcome them." In 1887, no pregnancy came, and Xavier was secretly relieved. Their family felt complete with 5 children ranging from Thomas at 8 years old down to baby Daniel at 1. The older children helped with the younger ones, and the homestead ran with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. That summer, a letter arrived from Fort Smith. It was from Molly Raid, the first communication they had received from her since leaving almost 9 years earlier. Xavier brought it in from the road with their other mail, and Olivia opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Olivia and Xavier," Molly had written in her neat script. "I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I have often thought of you over the years and wondered how you were faring. I am writing because something has happened that I thought you should know. Last week, a man came into my restaurant asking about you, Olivia. He said his name was Harold Norton and that he was your cousin. I told him I did not know anyone by that name and asked him to leave, but I wanted to warn you that he is looking for you. He seemed determined, and I worry he may eventually track you down. Please be careful." I pray that your life with Xavier has been everything you hoped for. With love and concern, Molly Reid. Olivia read the letter aloud, her voice steady but her hands shaking. When she finished, she looked at Xavier with fear in her eyes. He is still looking for me, after 9 years. Xavier felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. He will not find you. You are Olivia Zimmerman now, not Olivia Norton. You are my wife and the mother of my children, protected by me and by everyone in this community who knows and loves you. Even if he somehow tracked you here, he would have to go through me to reach you. I do not want violence, Olivia said. I do not want the children exposed to that. Neither do I. But I will protect this family, whatever it takes. Write to Molly and thank her for the warning. And then we will put it out of our minds. We have worked too hard to build this life to let someone from your past destroy our peace. They heard nothing more about Harold, and as months passed, the worry faded. Life continued its busy rhythm, and there was too much to do to dwell on threats that might never materialize. In 1888, Thomas turned 10 and asked his father to teach him to break horses. Xavier, proud of his son's courage and skill, began training him. Maggie, now 7, was reading at a level far beyond her years and helping Olivia teach the younger children their letters. James at 5 was a natural rancher, more interested in the cattle and horses than in books. Catherine at 4 was her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and garden. Daniel at 2 was a happy, curious child who followed his older siblings everywhere. That fall, Xavier traveled to Fort Smith on business for the first time since he had left with Olivia 9 years before. He went to sell cattle and buy supplies, and while he was there, he stopped at the Frontier Kitchen to visit Molly Reid. Molly had aged, her hair now gray and her face more lined, but her smile was warm when Xavier walked through the door. "Xavier Zimmerman," she said, coming around the counter to embrace him. "It has been far too long. How are Olivia and the children?" Xavier told her everything, painting a picture of their life over the past 9 years. Molly listened with joy and satisfaction, clearly pleased that the gamble she had encouraged Olivia to take had paid off so well. "She was so brave to go with you," Molly said. "And you were so brave to ask her. I am glad it worked out." "Thank you for writing to warn us about Harold," Xavier said, his voice more serious. "We have heard nothing since your letter. Do you know if he is still in the area?" Molly shook her head. "I have not seen him again. I think he moved on when he realized I would not help him. Hopefully he has given up and gone back to wherever he came from." Xavier stayed in Fort Smith for 3 days, conducting his business and seeing how the town had changed. It was larger now, more settled, with more brick buildings and paved streets. But it still had the rough edge that came from sitting on the border of Indian territory. On his last evening in town, Xavier was walking back to his hotel when a man approached him on the street. He was well dressed in a suit coat and derby hat, but there was something unpleasant about his expression, a kind of entitled smugness that immediately put Xavier on guard. "Excuse me," the man said. "I am looking for someone and I wonder if you might help me. I am searching for my cousin, a young woman named Olivia Norton. She would be about 30 years old now, with dark auburn hair and green eyes. I have been told she came through Fort Smith some years ago." Xavier felt his blood run cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "Why are you looking for her? Family business. I am Harold Norton, and Olivia is the last of my blood relations. I have been trying to find her for years to settle some estate matters." Xavier knew immediately that this was a lie. The man in front of him had the look of someone who was hunting, not searching, and his eyes, when they met Xavier's, were cold and calculating. "I am sorry, I cannot help you," Xavier said. "I am just passing through town myself." He moved to walk past Harold, but the man grabbed his arm. "Are you certain? I am willing to pay for information." Xavier looked down at the hand on his arm, then up at Harold's face. "Let go of me." Something in Xavier's tone must have convinced Harold not to push further. He released Xavier's arm and stepped back, but his eyes narrowed. "If you do hear anything, I am staying at the Union Hotel. There would be a substantial reward." Xavier walked away without responding, his mind racing. Harold was still looking for Olivia after all these years, still in Fort Smith, or at least passing through regularly. This was more serious than they had realized. Back at his hotel room, Xavier sat on the bed and considered his options. He could confront Harold, but that would only confirm that he knew something about Olivia. He could try to scare him off, but violence would bring the law down on both of them. The best option was to leave town immediately and say nothing. Xavier rode out before dawn the next morning, pushing Chester hard to cover the distance home as quickly as possible. He arrived 2 days later, dusty and exhausted, and told Olivia everything. "He is still looking," Olivia said, her face pale. "After 9 years he is still looking. What does he want from me? I do not know, but I do know that he will not find you here. We are 40 miles from Fort Smith, with a different last name, and no one in town knows your maiden name or your history. Even if he somehow learned that someone named Zimmerman lives out here, there would be no way to connect you to the Olivia Norton he is searching for. Unless someone from town mentions they know a woman named Olivia," she said quietly. "Unless someone mentions your wife has auburn hair and green eyes." Xavier had thought of that too. "Tomorrow, I will visit all our neighbors and explain the situation. They all know us. They all care about our family. They will know not to mention you to any strangers asking questions." And that was what he did. Over the next week, Xavier rode to every homestead within 20 miles and told them that his wife had a relative who had wronged her in the past and was now trying to find her. He did not go into details, but he asked them to be discreet about his family if any strangers came asking questions. To a person, their neighbors agreed immediately. The Zimmermans were well liked and respected, and frontier communities protected their own. Months passed with no further incidents. Xavier made a point of conducting all their business in the nearest town rather than Fort Smith, even though it meant higher prices and less selection. They saw no sign of Harold and heard no reports of strangers asking questions. In the spring of 1889, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again with their 6th child. Xavier was worried about her health after the difficult birth of Daniel, but Olivia was confident and happy. "I am stronger now than I was then," she assured him. "And this time I know what to expect. We will be fine." The pregnancy progressed without complications, and in December of 1889, Olivia gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Elizabeth. The birth was easier than Daniel's had been, and Elizabeth was a calm, peaceful baby who seemed content just to observe the chaos around her. The house was now full to bursting with 6 children ranging from 11-year-old Thomas down to infant Elizabeth. The older children were becoming self-sufficient and helpful, Thomas and Maggie taking on significant responsibilities around the homestead. James was learning to handle the horses and cattle alongside his father. Catherine and Daniel were inseparable playmates, always creating games and adventures. The 1890s arrived with prosperity and peace. The ranch was successful, producing enough income that Xavier was able to hire additional help and focus more time on his family. Olivia had to give up teaching when Elizabeth was born, but she found she did not miss it as much as she had expected. Her days were full with managing the household and raising the children, and she was content. In 1892, Thomas turned 14 and announced he wanted to attend the new high school that had been established in the nearest town. It would mean boarding there during the week and coming home on weekends, and both Xavier and Olivia struggled with the idea of their oldest child leaving. But they knew education was important, and they were proud of Thomas's ambition. They arranged for him to board with a respectable family and visit home every weekend. With Thomas gone during the week, Maggie stepped up to help even more with the younger children. At 11, she was mature and responsible beyond her years. James, now 9, became Xavier's constant companion, learning ranching from morning to night. Catherine, at 8, was attending the local school and proving to be a talented artist, always drawing pictures of the horses and landscape. Daniel, at 6, was the family comedian, always making everyone laugh with his antics. Elizabeth, at 2, was a sweet, quiet presence who brought joy wherever she went. In the summer of 1893, 15 years after Xavier had first built the house, they held a celebration. Neighbors from miles around came to mark the anniversary and to celebrate the success of the Zimmerman homestead. Tables were set up in the yard, loaded with food that Olivia and the other women had prepared. The men gathered to talk cattle and crops and politics. The children ran wild, playing games and exploring. As evening fell and the party continued with music and dancing, Xavier and Olivia stood together on their porch, watching the scene. 15 years, Olivia said softly. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday that I rode to Fort Smith looking for a wife. Other days it feels like we have always been together. You ever regret it, taking such a risk on someone you did not know? Xavier turned to look at her, this woman who had aged from 22 to 37 alongside him, who had borne him 6 children, who had worked beside him to build everything they had. Her auburn hair had threads of gray now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling. She was more beautiful to him now than she had been the day they met. Not for a single moment, he said. You are the best decision I ever made. You and our children are everything. Olivia kissed him, a long, tender kiss that conveyed years of love and partnership. When they broke apart, Thomas was standing nearby, now almost as tall as his father, watching them with a mixture of embarrassment and affection. You two are going to make all the guests uncomfortable with that kind of behavior, he teased. Let them be uncomfortable, Xavier said, pulling Olivia close. A man has a right to kiss his wife at his own party. The celebration continued late into the night, and when the last guests finally left, the Zimmerman family collapsed into bed exhausted but happy. It had been a perfect day, a marker of how far they had come and how much they had achieved together. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and family and community. In 1895, Thomas graduated from high school, one of only a handful of students in the region to do so. He announced his intention to study agriculture at the state college, wanting to bring modern farming techniques back to the ranch. Xavier and Olivia were so proud they could hardly speak, and they found the money to send him, even though it meant tightening the budget. Maggie, at 14, was teaching at the local school, following in her mother's footsteps. James, at 12, was already doing the work of a grown man on the ranch, and Xavier knew his middle son would take over the operation someday. Catherine, at 11, had decided she wanted to be an artist and spent every spare moment drawing and painting. Daniel, at 9, was attending school but dreaming of adventures beyond the homestead. Elizabeth, at 5, was attending school for the first time and loving every moment. In the spring of 1896, nearly 18 years after Xavier had first ridden to Fort Smith, a stranger appeared at the homestead. Xavier was working in the barn when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. He came out to see a man in his 40s, well-dressed but looking travel-worn, dismounting near the house. "Can I help you?" Xavier called, walking toward the stranger with caution. "I hope so," the man said. "I am looking for the Zimmerman Ranch. I was told I could find it here." "You found it." "I am Xavier Zimmerman. What can I do for you?" "My name is Richard Thompson. I am a lawyer from Fort Smith. I am looking for a woman named Olivia Norton, who I believe may be living in this area. I have some information that might interest her." Xavier felt his stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. "What kind of information?" "Legal information regarding an estate. It is a private matter. Do you know anyone by that name?" Before Xavier could answer, Olivia came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She froze when she saw the stranger, and Xavier saw recognition and fear flash across her face. "Olivia Norton," Richard Thompson said, his voice gentle. "Or I suppose it is Olivia Zimmerman now. I have been searching for you for a long time. What do you want?" Olivia asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "I bring news, though I am afraid some of it is sad. Your cousin, Harold Norton, passed away 6 months ago. He died of pneumonia in Ohio." Xavier felt Olivia's hand slip into his, gripping tight. She said nothing, waiting. "Before he died," Richard Thompson continued, "Harold made a full confession to his pastor. He admitted that he had lied about you, that he had slandered your reputation out of spite when you rejected his inappropriate advances. He dictated a legal document, which I have here, stating the truth and exonerating you of all the false accusations he made. He also left you his entire estate, which is considerable. He had no other family, and I believe this was his attempt at restitution for the harm he caused you." Richard Thompson pulled a thick envelope from his coat and held it out. Olivia took it with shaking hands. "I do not want his money," she said quietly. "I do not want anything from him." "I understand," Richard said, "but legally it is yours. The estate is worth approximately $15,000, which has been held in trust waiting for you to be found. Whether you accept it or refuse it is your choice. But I would encourage you to think about it. That much money could provide education for your children, security for your future." Xavier looked at Olivia, letting her make the decision. She stood silent for a long moment, the envelope in her hands. Finally, she said, "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me this. I need time to think about it. Can you come back tomorrow?" "Of course," Richard said. "I am staying at the hotel in town. I will return tomorrow afternoon if that suits you." After he left, Olivia and Xavier sat on the porch, the envelope unopened between them. The children were in the house, giving them privacy. "He is dead," Olivia said finally. "Harold is dead. After all these years of being afraid, of looking over my shoulder, he is just gone." "How do you feel?" Xavier asked. "I do not know. Relieved, I think, and angry, and sad. Angry that he stole years of my life with his lies. Sad that he wasted his own life on bitterness and spite. Relieved that he finally told the truth, even if it came too late to matter to most people." "Do you want the money?" Olivia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Part of me wants to refuse it, to have nothing from him. But the practical part of me thinks about Thomas at college and the tuition we are struggling to pay. About Maggie and James and Catherine and Daniel and Elizabeth, and all the opportunities that money could give them. About you and me, growing older, and the security it could provide. I think Harold knew that. I think that is why he left it to me, not just as restitution but as a final acknowledgement of everything he took from me." "Then we will accept it," Xavier said. "Not for him, but for us, for our family." The next day, Olivia signed the necessary papers, and Richard Thompson arranged for the money to be transferred to their account at the bank. It was more money than either of them had ever imagined having, and they were careful and thoughtful about how to use it. They set aside funds for all 6 children's education, ensuring that each of them could attend college if they chose. They paid off all their debts and invested in improvements to the ranch. They donated a substantial sum to build a new church and school for the community. And they put the rest into savings, providing security for the future. But despite the windfall, their lives did not change dramatically. They continued to work hard, to live simply, and to focus on family and community. The money was a blessing, but it was not what mattered most to them. What mattered was the life they had built together, the children they were raising, and the love that had grown between them over 18 years of marriage. In 1898, Thomas graduated from college and returned to the ranch, bringing with him new ideas and techniques that helped increase their productivity. Maggie, now 17, announced her engagement to a young teacher from town, a quiet, thoughtful man named William Harris who clearly adored her. The wedding was planned for the following spring. James, at 15, was essentially running the day-to-day operations of the ranch alongside his father, and Xavier knew it would not be long before he could step back and let his sons take over completely. Catherine, at 14, had received a scholarship to an art school in St. Louis, and though it broke Olivia's heart to let her go so far away, they supported her dreams. Daniel, at 12, was talking about becoming a U.S. Marshal, inspired by stories of the lawmen who still worked in Indian Territory. Elizabeth, at 8, was the baby of the family, spoiled and loved by everyone. On a warm evening in September of 1899, Xavier and Olivia celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, decorating the house and preparing a feast. As the evening wound down and the children went to bed one by one, Xavier and Olivia found themselves alone on the porch once again, sitting in the same rocking chairs they had used for years, looking out at the land they had built their life on. 21 years, Olivia said, echoing the conversation they had had so many times before. Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am, that you chose me, that this became my life. I am the lucky one, Xavier said. I built a house, but you made it a home. You gave me children and love and purpose. Everything good in my life came from the day I walked into the frontier kitchen and saw you working behind that counter. Do you remember what you said to me at our first meeting, when you were trying to convince me to marry you? I said a lot of things. Which part do you mean? You said that your life would not be easy, but that we would be building something together from the ground up. Something that would be ours. You were right. It has not always been easy, but it has been ours, and it has been wonderful. Xavier reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after years of practice. I love you, Olivia Zimmerman. I have loved you since the day I met you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Xavier. Thank you for building this house. Thank you for riding to town and bringing me back to be your bride. Thank you for giving me a home. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out overhead, the same stars they had watched together for 21 years. The house behind them was full of the sounds of their children sleeping, the sounds of life and love and family. In the distance, cattle lowed in the pastures Xavier had fenced. Closer by, chickens roosted in the coop he had built. The creek ran clear and cold beyond the oak trees, just as it had when he first claimed this land. Everything he had dreamed of when he hammered the first nail into the first board had come true and more. The house had stood strong through storms and seasons. The land had proved fertile and generous. The woman he had brought home as his bride had become his partner, his love, and the mother of his children. Together, they had built not just a homestead but a legacy that would continue through their children and their children's children. As the years continued beyond that anniversary, the Zimmerman family continued to grow and thrive. Maggie married William Harris in the spring of 1900, in a beautiful ceremony held in the new church that had been partially funded by Harold Norton's money. Xavier walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Olivia wept openly throughout the ceremony. William was a good man who treated Maggie like a treasure, and they settled in town where he taught, and she continued her own teaching career. Within a year, Maggie gave birth to Xavier and Olivia's first grandchild, a boy they named David. When Maggie brought him to visit the ranch for the first time, Xavier held his grandson with the same wonder he had felt holding his own children, and Olivia laughed at how gentle and careful he was with the tiny infant. Thomas married in 1902, choosing a practical, intelligent young woman named Helen, whom he had met at college. They made their home in a new house they built on the far end of the Zimmerman property, and Thomas began implementing all the modern agricultural techniques he had learned. The ranch continued to prosper under his innovations. James, Catherine, Daniel, and Elizabeth all found their own paths in the years that followed. James married at 21, choosing a rancher's daughter named Sarah who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Catherine pursued her art in St. Louis and eventually New York, making a name for herself as a painter of Western landscapes. She married a fellow artist and split her time between the city and regular visits home that she used as inspiration for her paintings. Daniel indeed became a U.S. Marshal, following his childhood dream and serving with distinction in Indian Territory and later in Oklahoma after it achieved statehood. Elizabeth, the youngest, became a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in Arkansas. She married a fellow physician and opened a clinic in the nearest town, where she served the community for decades. Through it all, Xavier and Olivia remained at the center of the expanding family. As they grew older, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work of the ranch, letting Thomas and James take over operations. They spent more time with their grandchildren, who multiplied over the years, and with each other, enjoying the peace they had earned through decades of hard work. In 1910, they celebrated their 32nd anniversary surrounded by their 6 children, their children's spouses, and 14 grandchildren. The house Xavier had built with his own hands, expanded and modified over the years, overflowed with family. They gathered for a feast that lasted all day, sharing stories and memories, laughing and crying and celebrating the life they had all built together. As evening fell and the younger grandchildren were put to bed, the adults gathered on the porch, and Thomas stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "Dad, you built a house with your own hands and created a foundation strong enough to hold all of us. Mom, you had the courage to trust a stranger and build a life in a wild, lonely place. Together, you have given us an example of love, partnership, and dedication that we all try to live up to. Thank you for everything you have sacrificed and everything you have given. This family exists because of your courage and your love." Everyone raised their glasses, and Xavier and Olivia stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built. Xavier looked at Olivia, seeing the young woman she had been in the creases around her eyes and the gray in her hair. She looked back at him, seeing the determined cowboy who had walked into the frontier kitchen with a wild proposal and a dream. They smiled at each other, and in that smile was 32 years of shared history, of challenges overcome and joys celebrated, of children raised and a life built together from nothing but raw land and hope and love. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The oak trees rustled in the evening breeze. The creek ran clear and cold, just as it had when Xavier first claimed this land. The house stood solid and strong, its walls filled with laughter and love and the echoes of 3 decades of family life. Xavier had built a house with his own hands. He had ridden to town and brought back a bride. Together, they had filled that house with love and life and created something that would endure long after they were gone. It was not the Wild West of gunfights and outlaws that stories were made of. It was quieter, gentler, but no less heroic for that. It was the story of 2 people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful from nothing. It was a story of love, of home, of family. It was their story, and it was complete. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Xavier and Olivia remained on their porch, holding hands and watching the night sky. They had traveled far from that day in Fort Smith, when they had been strangers taking a leap of faith. They had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams, not because it was easy or perfect, but because they had built it together, with love and determination, and an unwavering commitment to each other, and to the family they had created. The house Xavier built still stood, a testament to his skill and determination. The family he and Olivia had raised continued to grow and thrive, spreading across the state and beyond, but always coming home to the ranch that had been the foundation of it all. And at the center of everything, 2 people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other, living proof that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we build with our own hands and hearts, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. Their story had a happy ending, not because it was without challenges or sorrow, but because they faced everything together and never gave up on each other or on the life they were building. They grew old together on the land Xavier had claimed and the house he had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy of hard work, love, and commitment. And when people asked them the secret to their long, happy marriage, they always gave the same answer with a laugh that contained decades of shared joy and struggle alike. Xavier would say he had built a house, but Olivia had made it a home. And Olivia would say she had taken a chance on a cowboy with a dream, and that chance had given her everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever imagined possible. Together, they had proven that love, partnership, and determination could build something that would last not just a lifetime but for generations to come. A legacy as solid and enduring as the house Xavier had built with his own hands and the home they had filled with love.